Have you ever felt intimidated when thinking about making a brisket? Have you felt disappointed when your brisket doesn't give you an applause for your awesome cooking skills? Or have you ever had to submerge your brisket in barbecue sauce because it's lacking this awesome juice? Let me show you how to make one, and it's not that complicated as you may think. First, you'll need a big old slab of Texas beef brisket. This one is almost 16 pounds, and I purchased the one that had the decal fat removed. That's all they had at the time. Get a cutting board, and as a quick tip, if your board slides real easy on the counter, get a couple of damp paper towels and place them underneath your cutting board. This adds a good amount of friction, and it keeps your board in place, which will prevent you from cutting yourself if it decides to suddenly move on you. For the rub, I'm keeping it real simple. I'm using half of Killen's Texas S&P blend, which is not sponsored. I've grown to liking this one, nice coarse pepper and salt to give the brisket a real great bark. And the other half of the rub, I'll be using this hardcore Carnivore black seasoning. It's a mix of sea salt, garlic, black pepper, a little chili and onion powder, with a dash of activated charcoal. Excellent flavor, and it'll give the brisket a wonderful dark color. I'll leave a link in the description. Sharpen your knife and let's open this bad boy up. I'm gonna rinse it off real quick and I'll be right back. Alright, let's pat it dry and let's start trimming this brisket. All we're going to do is remove any unnecessary fat and parts that may seem a little bit discolored. We're just trying to freshen up the brisket to make it look presentable. The brisket is labeled as trimmed, but there's still a little work to be done. The part that you see here is a little discolored and oxidized, and not quite sure how this happens, but regardless, it's coming off. And like I always say, if you're not going to eat it, don't feed it. If you have corners on your brisket like this, try to avoid them. I'll tell you why. They tend to burn, and it also doesn't help with presentation. You want nice, smooth curves. Just get your sharp knife and cut around the corner to smooth it out. This part of the brisket here is called the point, and I'm just going to remove this small chunk of fat right here. It's good to have some fat, but this part of the brisket doesn't need a whole lot due to the fact that this area has a lot of good marbling. Trim any other pieces of fat that you see fit. With the brisket flipped over now, this section is called the flat, and it's not as marbled as the point, so we want to have at least a 1/4 inch of fat to help keep the brisket moist and protect it from the heat from our smoker. Trim it down until you get a thickness equivalent to this right here, about a 1/4 inch. Now, not as always necessary, but I use mustard as a binder for the rub, and of course you got to use Whataburger mustard for a Texas brisket. Get every drop you can out of that bottle and lather your brisket up. Get every nook and cranny, flip it over, and repeat. Right here I discovered a little more oxidation, so I went ahead and trimmed that off. Now it's time for the rub. We're going to start with our salt and pepper blend. Make sure to be liberal with it. Brisket can take a lot of seasoning. This is what's going to give the bark layer of our brisket some great texture. Next, let's use our Carnivore seasoning, which will give our brisket a nice deep dark color and flavor. Flip it over and do the same thing. Make sure to pat the seasoning down so it can adhere pretty good. Don't forget about the sides, they need loving too. Now just keep in mind, if you ask 100 people how to cook a brisket, you're going to get 100 different answers. I've made quite a few briskets and experimented with different techniques, and the way I'm showing you is what has worked perfectly for me. Now that our brisket has been properly seasoned, let it rest for at least an hour. 2 or 3 would be great. That way the rub can begin to really stick and become one with the meat. After the brisket has rested, I'm using my pellet smoker and setting it at 200 degrees. I'm also using Mesquite blend pellets. I'm using a low heat so that the smoke can really penetrate the brisket and give us an awesome smoke ring. Make sure to have the fat side down. The heat rises from below of the pellet smoker, and that will help protect the brisket from drying out. This is also the time to shape your brisket for presentation purposes. However you place it in the smoker, that's the way it'll come out. I'm starting this at midnight, and I'll check it in the morning around 7. See y'all soon, guys. Good morning, everybody. Don't mind that dead plant that you see over there. The pellet box makes a vibrating noise when it's on, and the pot helps to keep it quiet. Let's check our brisket out. We have an excellent bark on this brisket, exactly what we're looking for. Let's go ahead and check the temperature. Right now it's at 142, which is fine, but I'm shooting for around 150. I'll keep it in there a little longer while I get some other things ready. I'm going to place my pellet smoker probe inside the brisket so we can monitor it from the outside. I'm going to set the smoker to 225, a nice slow cook. First, let me check to see if the hopper is full of pellets. Whenever you're adding pellets, try not to smash them down or they'll tend to stick together and they won't be able to fall down into the smoker. I'm going to use regular butcher paper and heavy-duty aluminum foil. I've used both separately and I prefer using both at the same time. Tear out 2 long sheets of butcher paper and the foil. Don't try to get the perfect size like me. I ended up being a tad short and had to use another strip. Alright, our brisket has reached 150 degrees. Let's go ahead and transfer the brisket over to the butcher paper. The reason behind the 150 degrees and wrapping it in butcher paper and or aluminum foil is because at 150 the brisket temperature begins to stall and it starts to quote-unquote sweat, which lengthens the cooking time dramatically and can cause it to dry out. Wrapping it causes the brisket to power through that stall process and the temperature will slowly rise to around the 200 degree mark. More on that in just a minute. Once the brisket is wrapped, pop it back in along with your temperature probe. It's 7:27 a.m. and it should take another 4 hours to be ready. Alright, we're back. It's 11:44 a.m. Let's check the point in and see what we got here. We're looking for a temperature between 200 and 203. Now the temp is a good gauge to determine if the brisket is done, but not absolute. I've had briskets done at 197. The best way to determine if the brisket is done is by the feel. Your thermal pin should be able to go into the brisket real easy, like butter, as they always say. We're getting 200 and it slides super easy. The flat is at 201, perfect. Time to wrap it back up and place it into a cooler. If you don't have a cooler, you can very well put it in the oven or microwave and wrap it with some towels. I'm going to let it rest in the cooler for 3 hours due to the time I'll be serving, but at a minimum, rest for at least 1 hour. Alright, it's been resting for 3 hours. Let's go ahead and unwrap our brisket. When keeping it in the cooler, I promise it'll stay nice and hot. It's still steaming actually. Man, this feels just like Christmas morning. Oh man, that looks absolutely amazing. I'm going to go ahead and drain the juice into a serving pan, but don't worry, I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to use that to place the sliced brisket in to keep it moist. Alright, here we go. The moment you've been waiting for. Time to slice this Texas brisket up. I always start with the end, which is referred to as the burnt end. The flavor is intense and is excellent with some chado beans. We have a perfect smoke ring, and I know I need to get an actual brisket knife. Maybe a knife company out there would like to reach out to me so I can do a review on one. More than happy to do it. Super tender and juicy, guys. And speaking of juice, look at this. And this is after 3 hours of resting. Still tons of juice coming out of this brisket. Let's cut up a few more slices for another confirmation test. They say if you cook the brisket right, it will give you an applause for a job well done. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's what's known in the brisket industry as a clapper. Here's a view of the two parts of the brisket that we're going to separate. The top part is referred to as the flat, and the bottom part is the point. Right in the middle is a thick piece of fat that really helps to juicify the brisket. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm using it. Put your knife at the end of the brisket and follow the natural line between the point and the flat. It'll come right off. This is the flat right here, a beautiful piece of meat. I'm going to put this in the pan because I'm actually taking this to my mother's house and I'll slice the rest there. Here's a couple of photos of the point sliced up. Remember, the point has a lot of marbling and is super tender and juicy, as you can see. Here's the flat that I placed into the pan earlier, all sliced up. It looks like I'm in a high-end barbecue restaurant. Making a brisket isn't hard, but it does take a lot of time. I promise it's all worth it and people will travel great distances for awesome barbecue. Man, this brisket just pulls apart with ease. Perfect meal for someone with no teeth. It's that tender. If you need a side dish for this brisket, I'll leave 1 or 2 videos at the end for you to try. Smash that like button if the video helps you out, and have a blessed day, everyone.